you, Ray, for that very generous introduction. So I told Ray when he asked me to do this that I am no expert in team science. When I was growing up as a young clinician scientist, team science didn't really exist. Of course it existed, it just wasn't a discipline for education. And I have to say that I am so jealous of you guys having an opportunity early in your career to take some time to really think about how best to engage in team science. Because the one thing that I've learned through my career, without a doubt, is the role of the PI in most important science is in many ways pretty small, or the contribution of the PI to the total effort is often pretty small. And so in learning how to work most effectively with teams and dynamically engage new groups over the course of your career, I think will be incredibly impactful to you. So kudos to Rutgers and the New Jersey ACTS for this course. Can you see my slide?
Yep, got it.
And oops. Okay.
We lost that.
Yeah, I did something wrong. All right, so that's the appropriate view.
There you go, got it.
All right. So I decided to entitle this Strength in Numbers, Team Science in the CTSA. Again, I'm not an expert in team science. I just work with a lot of teams. So what I thought I would do is take you very briefly through my story, how I got to be where I am now, and then talk a bit about our CTSA. And the good news is in the year 2022, our CTSA is probably a lot like your CTSA, because the grant was the RFA was pretty explicit about what they wanted each CTSA to do, and to develop the notion that the CTSA is sort of a automatic team that you have access to that can really amplify and accelerate your efforts. And then finally talk about what I discovered about the Ctsa Consortium, something that has been dramatically under-leveraged to date, but these 60 exceptional institutions that are capable of playing together on relatively short notice. So first, in my role as a clinical trialist, I do a lot of work with the pharmaceutical industry. Not sure it's directly relevant to the discussion today, but I include this slide in the deck, which you're more than welcome to have copies of. And it just lists my engagements. So the first team I was born into, and that was the team of my family. But for my career, this ended up being a very auspicious start. So my parents met during an endocrine fellowship. They were diabetes investigators. My father, the first from his family to go to college, born and raised in South Carolina. He did well and was sent to the University of Pennsylvania to learn something about diabetes and endocrinology, specifically in research. And my mother was a survivor of World War II and the Holocaust, and emigrated to Argentina, did well, got a prize for doing research, and that was to also go to the University of Pennsylvania to learn more about research. My father was sent to the airport to pick up this woman that was coming from Argentina, and over a period of a year developed a partnership around research, which extended to eventually to marriage and raising children. They were both extraordinary academic clinician scientists. My father tended more towards the clinician educator end of the spectrum, and my mother more to the research end of the spectrum, but they both engaged in both all the time. And what my father really hammered home for me, which I think was an important lesson, is that whether acting as a physician or as a teacher or as a investigator, it was really important to be there for people. That when you were with people, you had to give them your attention, make it clear that you cared about them as individuals and you wanted to help. And my mother, again, more focused on science, but also a clinician and an educator, felt that the most important thing to do was to do the menial tasks well. That you can't actually do anything important in life if you are not good at doing the base activities. We often get drawn to the shiny objects and doing the higher profile activities. But at the end of the day, to be successful in science or successful as a clinician or successful as an educator, we can't forget the menial tasks. The one thing I knew as I graduated from high school and went to college is that I did not want to end up in a field where I would, where my parents would be able to sort out, what bozo I really was. I had done well in school, and so they sort of thought I was pretty good, but I knew if I really got into medicine, they would quickly figure out my deficiencies. And then if I went into eventually I went into medicine because I really had no other talent. But if I went into medicine, the thing I needed to stay away from was diabetes. I started out pursuing a career in oncology. It was an MD PhD student. My PhD mentor was told that he wasn't going to get tenure. I had to scramble around to find another nice guy immunologist to finish my PhD in immunology. And I ran into this guy, George Eisenbarth, who was in his first year as a faculty member, absolutely infectious personality. Was a guy who had more good ideas before breakfast than most people will have in a week or a month, or maybe even a year. What I really learned from him is the notion that as you engage people, whether that's technicians in the lab, students, colleagues, to be open with your ideas and sharing your ideas. He would always, he would just blurt out these ideas, I wonder if, and then to encourage you to move forward with the idea, he'd always follow it up with some kind of bet. I think he really taught me the importance of being open with colleagues and sharing your ideas and generating enthusiasm for moving forward together to find answers. Eventually, I went to the University of Chicago, and part of it was based on meeting this guy on the left, Arthur Rubinstein. He eventually became the dean at the University of Pennsylvania, and at the time he was the chairman of the Department of Medicine when I met him. Very unassuming chairman. He came to the Joslin Diabetes Center where I was doing my research with George Eisenbarth early one morning, about 6 a.m. There's this guy with an accent in the hall with a worn spot on his blazer that his elbow was sticking through. I thought he was a person off the street, like a street bum. He'd gotten up very early in Chicago and flown in that early that morning, and just had a lovely breakfast with him where I had no idea he was the chairman of the Department of Medicine. He was interested in the research that I was doing, and that was the reason why I went to the University of Chicago. And what he preached most is that the patient must always come first, and particularly in research, that it was important to engage the patient with regards to the direction of the research and how the research protocol was going, if it was patient-engaged research, but also just in every patient interaction, to try and forget about what your needs were and what the needs of others were, that the patient's needs should always come first. And the guy at the fourth from the right, second from the left, His name is Ken Polanski. He's now the dean at the University of Chicago, was chairman of the Department of Medicine at WashU in between. He was my division chief as I grew up as a intern, resident, and fellow at the University of Chicago. And he's the one that really imprinted on me the idea that academic life brings immense reward. Not such a problem in endocrinology, a very underpaid area of medicine, but in many other areas of medicine, there are opportunities to perhaps have higher salaries in private practice or in industry. But he's the one that really reminded me that that academic life brings immense reward with regards to the ability and flexibility to pursue ideas over a career, and this sort of automatic team that we always surround ourselves with. Whether you think of people at different levels of training, so students, fellows, et cetera, or if you think about colleagues across disciplines, basic scientists, population scientists, different disciplines within medicine. And then my immediate mentor was a guy named Graham Bell, who was the hardest working guy I've ever met. His postdoc program was cloning the human insulin gene and deriving its sequence. He did that largely having to purify his own restriction enzymes, as an example. Absolutely heroic piece of work. The Lilly human insulin is made off of his construct, so he ended up doing quite well financially. But what he taught me was to work smarter, not harder. I saw what working as hard as he did, what a burden that was on him and his family. And when I would reflect with him about the challenges that I had in working 7 days a week, 365 days a year, he basically told me that, well, John, what you're going to have to do is work smarter, not harder. So these people that I met in my career really imparted on me very important characteristics. And as I finished my fellowship, Arthur Rubinstein asked me to become a chief resident. And for those of you that are clinicians, you know what this role is. It's a heavy emphasis on teaching, a heavy emphasis on clinical work, and in some ways being the sort of the maitre d' of the offerings of the, in my case, Department of Medicine, with regards to inpatient care and inpatient consultation. And so I during that exercise, I really loved the role of at least trying to be the master clinician, and really enjoyed teaching medical students and residents, and thought that it might be easier in an academic career to focus on clinical research as opposed to basic research, because it would be sort of a more holistic approach, that my clinical care would bridge naturally to my clinical research program and my teaching of future clinicians. I was naive in thinking that that was going to make my life easier, but it was the path that I pursued, and I don't regret it at all. It just clinical research is immensely more challenging than basic research, mostly because having your way with people as an investigator is so much harder than having your way with rodents or molecules. But in any case, my introduction was doing a pharmaceutical industry sponsored clinical trial. Those are easy to recruit to an institution if you have a patient population and some desire to do it. It's gotten to be more challenging over the course of my career, but in any case, it's a great way of learning about doing clinical research. And on this slide, this is me, the Troglodyzone study group. I was one of, 100 different investigators involved. Obviously didn't play a role in writing the paper, but within a few years, I did get a chance to write another paper on another clinical trial with this drug for type 2 diabetes care. There's a long, long story about the glutazones and the roles that I got to play in investigation, including NIH-funded clinical research and industry-funded clinical research with this, very important class of medications for both diabetes care and potentially prevention. But the love of my life in the diabetes drug development space are the GLP-1 receptor agonists. And my introduction to those came at an American Diabetes Association meeting, I think it was in 1992, where, I was just frankly a little bit hungover from over celebrating with my friends the evening before. And just didn't feel up to sitting in a lecture hall at the American Diabetes Association meeting all day. So I decided to go to the poster rooms. They had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of posters, and just wander around, and ran into this guy, John Eng, who was standing in front of a poster that showed that this extract from the saliva of a Gila monster lowered glucose in a diabetes animal model. And he decided to try that based on protein sequencing data that he had, that this molecule Exendin-4 seemed to have sequence homology, protein amino acid sequence homology with GLP-1, which was a hormone produced in the intestinal lining that was known at the time to stimulate insulin secretion. He was a biochemist by training, a protege of Rosalind Yalow. He was drawn to this area of research because there was an RFA released by the NIH that looked to fund research on defining biologically active peptides from the venoms of reptiles. He had an assay or a purification method based on isolating peptides that would bind and cleave proteins with histidines in their N-terminus. And in any case, he came to discover this peptide Exendin-4. He shopped it around to every pharmaceutical company on the earth. Nobody bit. Everybody said, why do we need another injected peptide? We have a really good one, insulin. He asked his wife, he went to the VA where he worked and said, I'd like to patent this molecule. The VA said, why would the VA want to patent this molecule? It doesn't have a direct impact on the life of veterans. Bring us something that will prevent concussions or cause faster healing of wounds, and we're interested. He asked his wife whether he could take every nickel that they have and hire a patent lawyer to patent this. To make a long story short, he did patent it, and I was able to introduce him to some of my friends from a small pharmaceutical company that was interested in peptide hormones, Amylin Pharmaceuticals, and in about 7 years, a drug, exenatide, was the first GLP-1 receptor agonist marketed. It's now the fastest growing class of diabetes medications, and various agents within the class have indications not only for improving blood sugar control in diabetes, but also for cardiovascular event reduction, MI, stroke, and cardiovascular death. And arguably, they are the most effective weight loss products in the universe right now. So very, very impactful science, which he largely did on his own. Not such a great team science story, but definitely the development beyond the Eng lab at the VA in the Bronx involved a huge team effort involving thousands of investigators around the world. So, that's basically how I got to do what I do. My involvement with the CTSA came from being one of the clinicians or clinician scientists at UNC that was involved in drug development and human subjects research. I'll come to that in a moment. And there are a few quotes that have resonated with me that I keep written down on a piece of paper that I'll share with you, that I picked up over the years. The first is, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellent then is not an act, but a habit. I do think this is really important. It sort of blends with my mother's mantra of doing the menial tasks well. The second is that your energy is contagious. Either you affect people or you infect people. And I'm sure all of you, that quote resonates with you. I think if you're mindful about it, you can affect people in a positive way. Often we sort of lose sight of our behavior in crowds, and we can turn people off. But try and stay focused on being positive and engaging, at least as you're trying to engage colleagues in the science that you're doing. And third, and in many ways, this is, I think, the most important thing that young people need to accept about science, and that is that success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking that they can't lose. I actually, I think the hardest thing about staying in a career in science when you're young is you'll get so many rejections from journals and so many grants that are rejected. So many, even when you have grants that are funded or papers that are published, you will have plenty of critique from people close to you and anonymous critiques from peer reviewers. You just need to learn how to embrace that and be grateful that people are willing to give you that kind of feedback, and to develop the methods in your own teams to be able to provide feedback to colleagues in a way that that helps them grow without being off-putting. The fourth one is a proverb, is a saying that apparently comes from Africa. I do love this one too. If you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And these last three really are about teams. And all I can say is, in my career, it is absolutely true that the bigger the team, basically the bigger the project that you can actually tackle. And it's usually the big projects are the ones that have the highest impact. So tough times don't last, tough teams do, and teamwork makes the dream work. So, so I have many different teams that I work with now, and I'm going to bridge now to talking about the CTSA program and how that can help you. But I do think it's really important, and I'm sure you guys will take a deep dive during the conduct of this course on the various different kinds of teams. But as I think of my teams, there are some that I would just characterize as collaboration, and the efforts that I think of most as purely collaboration, at least for me, are mostly my collaborations often with basic scientists, and they come to me. They'd like access to patients to do particular experiments or access to samples, or assistance with sort of developing the third aim of the grant. How could this be clinically translated? And frankly, many of these I think fall short of expectations because we don't really develop that interdisciplinary, interprofessional, or transdisciplinary kind of effort that I think can be much more productive. It's not that I ignore these efforts or that I don't value these efforts. I just sometimes wonder, or particularly over the last couple of days as I was putting these slides together, reflected on, how much further we might have gotten had we had the time and energy for deeper engagement. And I'll come back to that in a moment later on. Some of my favorite projects I characterized as interdisciplinary, and some of these that I'm involved in now are sort of data science projects, broadly in the pharmacoepidemiology area, where using data, we're evaluating the relative efficacy or safety of various approaches generally drugs or devices in particular populations. So this work involves epidemiologists, data scientists, and clinicians working together, where the sum of the three is greater than any one of the three could get done together, get done alone. And this is sort of beyond collaboration because it's an ongoing effort. My pharmacoepidemiology projects are derivative from a small crisis in the diabetes space, where the most commonly prescribed formulation of insulin in the world was reported to be associated with an increased risk of cancer. This was just as I was finishing my service as president of the American Diabetes Association. You know, the big scare was that everybody was going to stop taking their insulin because they were more afraid of cancer than of suffering consequences from stopping insulin in the context of their diabetes. So we had to put together a team to sort this out. I learned about this discipline of pharmacoepidemiology, recruited some people to start this process, and now nearly 20 years later, we're still meeting every other Tuesday with students and programmers to look at various pharmacoepidemiology questions that we can answer in the diabetes space. It's been a lot of fun. Pre-COVID, the Tuesday afternoon meeting was always done in a bar, and that made it even better. But now we do it by Zoom calls. It makes attendance easier for some. And then the third level is the interprofessional teamwork that essentially all clinicians engage in, where to get to the best outcome with the patient, at least in the diabetes space, it often involves the work of doctors and other prescribing providers, or nurse practitioners and physician assistants, working with nurses that are engaged in other parts of the care, educators, patient educators, dietitians, pharmacists, other clinicians from other disciplines, cardiologists, urologists, OBGYN. So this interprofessional interaction around an individual patient case is very valuable, and one of my favorite forms of teamwork. You know, the great thing about clinical work is that you get very rapid feedback, and it's generally positive, not always. You know, the problem with science is it takes a long time to do science, and the wonderful thing about clinical care is that people are grateful for your efforts, generally over the time course of days to weeks, as opposed to months to years. And then transdisciplinary efforts, and this is the way I characterize the clinical trial enterprise, where you have all kinds of people that are involved from all kinds of disciplines. So you have regulatory scientists and statisticians, clinical research professionals that might have specific expertise in conducting visits or recruiting patients, and then often the clinician scientists that are putting together the protocols. But when you have a clinical trial team, these people from various disciplines actually converge to sort of go beyond their disciplinary area to sort of develop an integrated mutual effort that is more shared, I find, than the sort of standard interdisciplinary effort. So to me, this is sort of the ultimate in teamwork, where the statistician and the regulatory people have to come together and really understand each other's disciplines as best they can to make the work go forward. So just as last slide before I bridge to the CTSAs, as a reminder for those of you that may not have heard much about this translational science, but translational science is really the process of moving ideas from, you know, if you do the entire spectrum of translation, from observations made in cells or animal models, often involving molecules or organs, to move them towards initial studies in people, and eventually the whole phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trial program that gets drugs approved, the so-called bench to bedside part of the translational spectrum. And then once a drug is approved, additional studies to really demonstrate how to best use the drug in healthcare systems, and eventually translation to population health and policy. And that's often thought of as practice to policy. This whole process of translation involves very high order teams with all kinds of different expertise, and even within a discipline like biostatistics or a clinical trialist, developing very specific areas of focus within this spectrum, but being able to encourage movement around this circle. It is inherently a team science exercise, and in the CTSA, which I eventually will come to, the critical thing to be aware of is that generally these methods of translational science and the findings of translational science are relevant to multiple diseases and populations. And that's why we can set up a program like the CTSA program, and CTSA stands for Clinical and Translational Science Award, a grant from the NIH branch called the NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Science. And those awards enable us to create infrastructure that helps move science to the bedside and to population health, the so-called translational process. And the science that we develop is applicable across disease states. So my expertise is in diabetes. My co-PI at UNC, he's a gastroenterologist, but investigators across the entire university and our partners use our services. So this is a screenshot of the New Jersey ACTS, New Jersey Alliance for Clinical and Translational Science, your home for the CTSA Award. I'm going to tell you about my home for the CTSA Award at UNC. We call it NC Tracks, for North Carolina Translational and Clinical Sciences Institute. We're one of 60 academic medical centers that are funded by this CTSA Award, the purpose of which, as defined by NCATS, is to accelerate the transfer of research findings to improvements in human health and to train the next generation of translational researchers. And that's you guys. At UNC, we partner with RTI International, a large contract research unit. They do about $1 billion a year in contracted research, largely with the federal government, but also with the pharmaceutical industry. North Carolina State University, which is very complementary to UNC because they have a veterinary school and a full program of engineering. At UNC, we only have biomedical engineering that's actually a joint department with North Carolina State. And then North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, that's the largest HBCU in America. They have a modest human subjects and health-related portfolio of researchers, but that's what we focus on increasing their capacity and success in research involving human subjects aimed at human health. So each CTSA is quite busy. Ours has been in existence. We're almost to the beginning of our 14th year. We've served over 3,000 investigators with more than 13,000 requests. We've had 90 KL2 scholars, 16 pre-doctoral candidates, and 6 postdoctoral candidates. We've been cited more than 1,000 times. We've facilitated over 300 IND and IDE submissions. We've funded over 1,000 pilot grants supporting 1,900 unique investigators. And these pilot grants to date have contributed to over 355 externally funded grants and more than $250 million in external funding. So we are busy, busy people. The way we think about our various services are that each of our services provide consultations to individual investigators or their teams. We provide training and education to the entire workforce, from study coordinators and phlebotomists to senior faculty and trainees. And each of these units are also tasked with developing novel tools and methods that can address the translational science barriers at UNC, or sometimes they're addressing more broad needs across the country and the globe. And the various services are listed to the right. So biostatistics, ethics, the Clinical and Translational Research Center is basically a facility with very expert nurses that are able to execute virtually any protocol for human subjects research. We have something called community and stakeholder engagement that involves stakeholders in helping design research projects that involve community and stakeholders in developing capacity for doing research through recruitment of human subjects. We have a comparative effectiveness research program that uses data to compare treatments, like the pharmacoepidemiology that I explained before. We have the educational training and workforce development, basically training and education for the full spectrum. We have a commercialization unit focused on identifying unmet needs in the clinic or in the research lab, using engineering principles to try and understand which one of those could be addressed, and then trying to come to a notion of what path for addressing those unmet needs could be successful. We have an informatics program that's very robust. Inclusive science program makes sure that there are not barriers to including people in research studies that have historically been poorly reached, such as minority groups, LGBTQI populations, people with disabilities, rural populations. We have pilot award proposals, programs, proposal development unit focused on recruitment and retention, regulatory affairs, research coordination and management unit that I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. That's relatively new for us, and a very high impact program, Team Science, and then the Trial Innovation Network. So what can our CTSA do to help our investigators? And I imagine your CTSA is the same. These are just 5 things that we can do. We can help you access data and data analysis, help you build a team and fund your research, help you design and conduct your clinical research project, help engage stakeholders in your research, either in the design or in the execution of your research, or both. And then we have various resources to expand your knowledge as an investigator. So with regards to access to data and data analysis, one of the things that has been fairly revolutionary at UNC, it actually started before the CTSA, but we kind of doubled down on it, is that there are these large databases that are extremely useful for doing population-based healthcare research. They're relatively expensive and therefore prohibitive for many individual investigators to get access to them. But what we have done is fund the site license for various of these large databases, and also have the expertise in how to do the analyses in these data sets. There's a lot of regulatory burden to doing this kind of work, but by having central resources, it allows for many investigators to do that. If you have a barrier that with regards to using certain data sources, we'll try and develop technology to address that. So as an example, we've developed a variety of text mining applications that have been really important in using electronic health records in research. And we also facilitate the engagement of our clinician scientists with clinical data from other institutions using clinical data research networks. Like the PCORNet model, like N3C, specifically focused on COVID. And then we also build features in our electronic health record at UNC EPIC to help support research studies. I mentioned to you a couple of times about pilot funding, but also in our team science program, we have an approach to link investigators with the right kind of expertise to investigators that are looking to bridge their science in a translational way. Often that's basic scientists that are trying to figure out, I think this might have something to do with diabetes, who should I talk to? But often it's really a clinician scientist who's wondering about a particular case and, is there some biologic rationale for what's happening, and doing back translation, engaging basic scientists who could help evaluate a particular patient. And then with regards to team science, one of the things that I wanted to mention to you is a new initiative, which is basically a sort of pilot award spin-off integrated with team science, which is basically to help support, provide financial and logistical support to go from an idea to a product. And here, we're not talking about a commercialized product, but really a grant application, or perhaps, we haven't done it yet, a patentable device. And we divided it into 2 phases. In the first phase, it's just a little bit of money, and quarter time project manager. We have found over and over and over again that often the special sauce to getting a team, interdisciplinary team really moving forward in an effective way is help with regards to scheduling meetings, keeping notes, creating websites or data repositories, doing the lifting with regards to identifying potential funding sources, et cetera, et cetera. So the magic of the first phase is really the project manager, and then the second phase is, assuming people meet their benchmarks, providing additional funds, perhaps to generate preliminary data, or do some assays to help extend existing databases in a way that allows for more impactful applications to be written. And then the project manager is really providing a lot more support with regards to the grant preparation and coordinating with various other units to make sure that the CTSA resources are leveraged optimally in this larger application. So Fast Tracks is the commercialization arm. It uses a similar process, but based more from engineering principles. So we lend engineers to clinical units or research units that are willing to take a deep dive with us with regards to, in their clinic or in their lab, what is it, what are the barriers to delivering the best possible experience for the patient or being able to conduct optimal science. These engineers, take a fairly deep dive with these teams, sort of weeks to months of being embedded with them, engaging in discussions about, how one might approach overcoming these barriers. And we have a special pilot award process that tags along with that, often to help with regards to generating early data that might be very impactful to either commercialize a process or to get funding from, let's say, an SBIR mechanism. And then something that's not really pioneered by our CTSA, but sort of the next level of engagement that we have at UNC is something called the Institute for Convergent Science. The magic here for the early teams is what they call the commons. It's really a space where a team that wants to get together can get lab space to work together. Often it's postdocs that lead this engagement of experts from very diverse fields to work together on a common project. And the wording they use around this is to try and develop these nimble projects, new invention, make it big or leave early. And the idea is to really look at high impact, high reward projects and recognize that early failure is often the best, the best possible outcome. You know, we're really aiming for success, but if we fail early, at least we haven't wasted a lot of time. This has been very successful. Not a large number of projects have moved on from the sort of track size projects that we've discussed so far, but a fair number of those have resulted in big impacts. And then I think I'm going to skip this. So we have a variety of different pilot award mechanisms. UNC CTSA leverages institutional funds to run a very robust pilot award program, almost $2 million a year historically. And then we provide assistance for conducting the clinical research in the design phase and in the execution phase with regards to regulatory support, which is technically fairly challenging for new investigators to master early on. And it is incredibly important that every investigator engage these regulatory experts early in the process to avoid problems, even in the pre-phase one, the preclinical phase of a research process. And then I mentioned this research coordination and management unit. You know, we were relatively resistant to this idea at UNC for many years. The idea that you could have highly experienced, knowledgeable study coordinators, or basically at the ready to serve investigators as needed. You know, I think many of us felt that engagement of a study coordinator with a team and with a particular protocol was so essential that every research team needed to have a full-time study coordinator. What we've discovered is that if you have highly experienced, knowledgeable study coordinators that are flexible, they can really have an enormous impact, and they have that by mentoring other teams. So the highest impact projects that we have are study startups. So for an investigator who's gotten a pilot award, or particularly the lucky fella who got their first R01 grant, but have never really done a substantive clinical trial. Having a knowledgeable study coordinator that comes on board to get all the regulatory paperwork done during that just-in-time phase, that actually will help set up the job description for the coordinator that you want to hire, to actually do the interviewing, do the training, make sure that everything is rolling at speed at the time when the notice of grant award is delivered. That can really be completely transformational for junior investigators. I'm going to skip that. And then I'm going to skip that too. And then I want to mention the Trial Innovation Network. This is actually across all the CTSAs. And the great thing about the Trial Innovation Network is it allows CTSAs to work together with regards to a particular clinical trial. The lead site is at Hopkins, but if you think you would like to do a multi-center clinical trial, please engage your CTSA in that regard. So this is the Ctsa Consortium. I got this picture yesterday, but to be honest, the dots are misplaced. Wake Forest isn't there. The University of Virginia isn't there. I don't know how old the picture is, but it definitely needs updating. And I wanted to tell you about this past recovery cohort grant proposal. So we actually put it together in a month. There were 60 CTSAs that participated. The aims were quite ambitious. They were about 20-fold more than what was required to submit such a grant, but clearly we had the capacity to do that. I won't go through the details here, other than to say that we said that we would identify and consent for recontact more than 100,000 people with post-acute sequela of COVID-19 and over 500,000 people with a history of SARS-CoV-2. And you might say, well, how was that even possible? I'll show you in a moment. The second thing is we said that we would get the regulatory approvals for surveying patients done in 10% of the sites per week. And how could we do that? Well, we have some pre-formed contracts between most of the CTSA, the so-called ACTA contract that people need to keep in mind, and that we would very quickly get to substantive numbers of patients that could be invited for sampling protocols. I have to say, I really think we could have done this. It's taken a year for the funded centers to really get to speed, and we'll leave it at that. So the 56 CTSAs that answered a survey, there were a total of 97 healthcare systems represented by the sites, involving 93 million people, more than a quarter of the entire US population, with a race ethnicity distribution that matches the population of the United States fairly well. It involved almost 500,000 births a year. At the time, this is over a year ago, there were more than 2 million COVID positive patients that were available through those centers, and nearly 150,000 people that were identified as having long COVID. This was at a time when the NIH was thinking that they might need to recruit 50 to 100. With regards to the infrastructure that we had in place, $14 billion of NIH funding annually, nearly 10,000 human studies involving already 135,000 patients at that time in March of 2021, and even a fair number of these long COVID studies and support. With regards to the capabilities of our informatics cores to identify patients, and that was the technique that we were going to use to get to large numbers of patients quickly, 96% of the sites had honest brokers that were available to do the electronic health record queries. There were a total across the 56 centers of 345 such individuals, and most of the centers were already providing data centrally to one or another model. So we knew that we were going to be able to identify patients very quickly, and demonstrated that well. We had nearly 700,000 square feet of clinical research space available, already staffed up, and with all the various support modalities that were required. And this is based on the fact that whether you look at the New Jersey ACTS or you look at NC Tracks, all of us have basically the same infrastructure. And then with regards to community engagement, which is going to be really critical to getting a diverse patient population enrolled in this study, again, because we all have our stakeholder and community engagement programs, we had a huge number, nearly 5,000 community partners engaged already, involving all kinds of different organizations and virtually all the underreached populations. And frankly, though we didn't get funded, at the end of the day, the first publication from the NIH Recover Initiative, as it became known, eventually was led by this Ctsa Consortium, this publication on methods to use informatics to identify patients with long COVID. So I'll end there and just summarize by: do the menial tasks well, do something that you think is important. Remember, the criticism of reviewers is a gift. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you'll arrive at the destination. My experience is that no one fails in a career focused on clinically relevant research and scholarship, though many bail, I think mostly because they lose heart and they don't see criticism of reviewers as a gift. I would absolutely attest to the fact that academic medicine provides a rich and varied career that will provide enough success built on failures to make it immensely rewarding. Be there for people. Teamwork makes the dream work, and get to know New Jersey acts. So thank you very much.
John, thank you so much. Great talk, and you know, the everything that you've done at UNC and for North Carolina. It's been wonderful. We at NJX mirror some of that, not to the same extent since we're newbies in the consortium, but it really did take a team. I didn't realize how much connectivity you have with University of Pennsylvania. I was there for 27 years. So know many of the people there very, very well, obviously. Bijou.
Supposedly, all the flirting happened at a place called Smoky Joe's. You probably
Oh, I know it very well. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very small world. So Ralph and Bijou, I guess, open for questions from the group.
Yeah, I'll put it forward to the entire audience. Any questions for Dr. Buse? That was a fantastic talk.
They're either very hungry or you just did a stunning job, John.
Yeah, Brian.
Hello. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on how you got so many people together for the initial application. Like, did you just go knocking on people's doors, or is there a more elaborate process for applying for such a massive grant like a CTSA thing?
Yeah, well, I have to admit, I wasn't involved or barely involved. So the original CTSA PI was a guy named Paul Watkins. Ours came about 15 years ago. At the time, it was not NCATS, it was called NCRR, and they gave you sort of the formula for what you were supposed to do, which was you took your General Clinical Research Center, a grant that we had, and all of our institutional K awards, and it was the aggregation of those that was to define your CTSA. And they had fairly explicit directions for what you were supposed to write for them. And then it was basically creating the impression for the reviewers that not only were you committed to the purpose of accelerating translational science, but that you would put together the various components that were basically outlined in the RFA. So the grant writing was really one of telling the reviewers what you want to hear, what they told you they wanted to hear, but backing it up with enough institutional resources to be able to make it credible that, yeah, you actually were going to be able to do this. It wasn't, I mean, I have to say it wasn't that hard to do. Then we got that when UNC submitted the grant, we were rejected the first time. We didn't get funded the first time. But then the reviewers gave us good feedback, and we were able to reply to, respond to that feedback. And again, I think it's absolutely critical when you get feedback to embrace it and move forward with the most positive attitude that you possibly can, even though your initial response is, these idiots, they just don't get it. It's almost always the case that if you go with the flow, the project will end up being better for having done so.
Yeah, I want to echo what John said. I had transitioned 9 months before I submitted the CTSA from Penn to Rutgers, so I didn't even know where I was parking. And I was writing a CTSA in an organization that I really didn't know who the players were. But there's a couple things when you take on a large task, and I'd like to get your sense, John, is keeping the stakeholders engaged. You cannot give people tasks and hope that in 2 months they come back with a finished product. For example, we had meetings basically every 2 weeks with co-leads. I'd have teleconferences with 22 people on them. That's inordinate. But what you were hearing was an exchange of ideas. It wasn't a dictatorship. It was an engagement. And I think engagement's really important in the team. If you don't get feedback, positive or negative, you lose interest quickly because we got lots of different directions to go. What do you think, John? Is that accurate?
That's very well said. And, I would go further that, I think the magic is to if you try and write a grant the week before it's due, you can try, but you'll generally fail. If you can start writing the day you get the RFA or put the team together, but try and get something down in writing relatively quickly, and give everybody an opportunity to provide feedback. Or even if you can identify 6 or 8 people who are going to write different sections of it, but just get stuff written down so that everybody can share in the activity, because the more perspectives you have, it's sort of like having reviewers even before you submit the grant. And for instance, that PASS grant, everybody thought it was kind of a miracle that we could put 60 CTSAs together in a month. It actually wasn't that hard because we got so much good feedback from 60 CTSAs. It wasn't everybody providing feedback at the same time. It wasn't the Tower of Babel. It would be this feedback, that feedback. But because we were able to get the ideas out there very fast and not have a lot of ego about when people said that was a bad idea or this could be done better, I was just amazed at how well it turned out.
I know we're over time, but I wanted to add my thanks for your remarks. I think it was a perfect introduction for our team science course. And I also wanted to make sure you saw the note from our student Sierra in the chat that she loved the story of your parents' meeting, as did I. I thought it was a really such a compelling way to start the presentation.
Well, if you do a PubMed search for Maria Buse, actually, I will send. There's a paper that was written about it.
Wow.
But I'll send it to Ray and he can share it.
I'll be happy to share it. That's what I call impact, John. I want to thank the team.
It's all about Smoky Joe's.
I want to thank the team science crowd for being here. We're thrilled. We're energetic and enthusiastic. I want to thank John, a wonderful colleague that I look forward to working closely with. And I could say, I'm sure if you have or want collaboration with the UNC CTSA, he's more than willing to put you in contact with their team so that we can all work towards the same goals.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.